An orange, kept for 14 years in a drawer. An aluminum bucket that never returned home. On a Saturday in March, Rita de Lourdes left for an extra day's work and simply vanished from the face of the earth. The silence stretched on for so long that the very house where she had worked was abandoned, swallowed by weeds, forgotten by time. Until a yellow excavator clawed a hole in the backyard, bringing back not only Rita, but all the questions that had never been answered. The alarm clock never had a chance to ring on that March Saturday in 1987. Rita de Lourdes had been on her feet since 5 in the morning, preparing coffee brewed in the same aluminum pot she'd used for years. Its strong scent mixed with the aroma of day-old bread she was warming in the gas oven, while a light rain pattered on the zinc roof of her simple home in São Gonçalo. At 50, Rita's body bore the marks of a lifetime dedicated to hard labor. Her calloused hands expertly folded the white cotton scarf she would tie at the nape of her neck, holding back the coily hair that always managed to escape during her long days of cleaning. Her navy blue dress, always immaculate despite its invisible mending, covered a slender but resilient frame, shaped by decades of carrying buckets, scrubbing floors, and reaching for high corners until her arms ached. In the small kitchen, her mother Yvonne was finishing a hem by the yellowish glow of an incandescent bulb. The rhythmic hum of the old Singer sewing machine blended with the sound of the rain. At 72, she had grown accustomed to her daughter's routine, but she still felt a tightness in her chest every time Rita left before sunrise. "Mom, I'm leaving later today," Rita said, adjusting the white apron over her dress. "Donna Clarice asked me to get the house ready for their Sunday guests. It's a double day's pay." Yvonne looked up from the fabric, well acquainted with her daughter's expression when she spoke of extra money. Rita's plans were simple but firm: renovate her mother's room before winter and finally make the eye doctor appointment she'd been postponing for months. "You don't have to work yourself to death, child," she murmured, but knew it was useless to argue. Rita kissed her mother's forehead and grabbed the aluminum bucket that always leaned against the utility room wall. It was an ordinary bucket, but she insisted on using only that one. She claimed aluminum didn't absorb the smell of chemicals like plastic did. In the right pocket of her apron, she placed the orange flannel cloth she had bought at the Central Market a few weeks earlier. It was her trademark. While other cleaners used old rags, Rita invested in new flannels that left no streaks on surfaces. The 6:15 bus was crowded as always. Rita held the bucket tightly as the vehicle swayed through the potholed streets of São Gonçalo, heading toward the center of Niterói. On the seat beside her, a young woman complained about her office job, and Rita thought about how people failed to appreciate what they had. She never complained. Work was a blessing, even when her body screamed with exhaustion at the end of the day. The second bus, a smaller one that climbed the steep hill of the São Francisco neighborhood, dropped Rita at the final stop at 8 in the morning, right on time. The sky had lightened, but the air was still heavy with the dampness of dawn. She walked 2 blocks along the cobblestone street until she saw the iron gate of the house where she had worked for 3 years. It was a 2-story residence built in the 70s, painted cream with brown trim. The large backyard had a separate service area connected to the main house by a covered walkway. Rita liked working there. She had space to move and an outdoor faucet where she could wash her bucket without bothering anyone. The street sweeper, an elderly man with graying hair who swept the sidewalk every morning, waved as she passed. "Good morning, Donna Rita. Early today, aren't you?" "Extra day, Seu Joaquim. The family's having company tomorrow." Joaquim glanced at his wristwatch. 8:05, same as always. Rita smiled and continued toward the gate, not knowing it would be the last time Seu Joaquim would see her alive. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Rita pushed the iron gate open, her footsteps echoing on the cement path leading to the house. The front garden was well tended, with trimmed grass and a few rose bushes that Donna Clarice insisted on keeping in bloom. It was a stark contrast to the neighboring houses, where weeds grew freely and paint peeled with age. Rita walked around the house toward the service area, giving a discreet nod to Dora, the neighbor who always seemed to be at her window on the second floor of the house next door. She was a curious woman, the kind who knew everyone's routine, but Rita never minded. She even thought it was good to have someone watching the street. It meant the neighborhood was safe. The Amaral family was still asleep when Rita began her work. Alvaro was a sales representative for an electrical supply company, and Clarice worked part-time at a private school. They had a driver, Mauricio, whom everyone called Pardal, a thin, serious man in his 40s who cared for the family's blue Chevette as if it were a rare jewel. Rita turned on the outdoor faucet and filled her bucket with warm water. The sound of water hitting the aluminum was somehow comforting. It was the sound that marked the beginning of every workday. She took the orange flannel from her pocket, dipped it in the water, and wrung it out to the perfect dampness. Too wet and it would drip on the floor. Too dry and it wouldn't pick up the dust. She began in the kitchen, as always. The white formica countertops needed special attention. Donna Clarice was particular about fingerprints and grease splatters. Rita wiped them in circular motions, then dried them with a clean cloth from her other apron pocket. Each gesture was calculated, the result of decades of experience in other people's homes. The kitchen phone rang at 12:20 p.m. Rita hesitated. It wasn't her habit to touch the family's things, but the ringing persisted for so long that she decided to answer so as not to wake anyone. "Hello? Rita, my child, is that you?" Her mother's voice sounded worried on the other end. "Hi, Mom. Is everything all right? Luciana didn't come home last night. She went out with her friends and—" "Mom, she's 17. She probably slept over at a friend's house." Rita glanced around the kitchen, making sure no one had come downstairs. "Look, I have to work late today. The family is having guests tomorrow, and I want to leave everything perfect." "You don't take care of yourself, Rita. You work too much. It's just for today. I'll be home early tomorrow and we can talk all you want." Yvonne sighed. "All right, but if anything happens—" "Nothing's going to happen, Mom. You rest easy." Rita hung up and returned to her work. She went up to the second floor where the bedrooms were. The wooden staircase creaked slightly under her feet, but she knew every step, every loose board. In the master bedroom, she organized the clothes strewn over an armchair and dusted the glass surfaces of the vanity. Through the window, she could see Dora hanging clothes on the line in the neighboring yard. Around 4 in the afternoon, Rita was cleaning the tiles in the service area when she heard voices from the house. The family had woken up and was preparing to go out. Donna Clarice appeared on the walkway wearing a floral dress and low-heeled sandals. "Rita, you're doing a wonderful job. When my sister arrives tomorrow, she'll find everything impeccable." "Thank you, Donna Clarice. I'm still going to wipe down the living room windows and take a look at the yard." "Don't work yourself to death. Mauricio is taking us to dinner with friends and we won't be back until late. You can leave whenever you're finished." Rita nodded and continued scrubbing the tiles. The afternoon sun beat down on the outdoor area, causing sweat to trickle down her forehead. She removed her white scarf, wrung it out, and tied it again at her neck. Her coily hair stuck to her damp skin, but she was used to the heat and the physical exertion. The blue Chevette purred in the garage as Pardal started the engine. It was almost 7 in the evening and the family was ready to leave. Rita heard the engine warm up as she finished organizing the cleaning supplies in the laundry room cabinet. Each bottle had its place, detergent next to disinfectant, clean cloths separated from dirty ones, brooms hanging on the hooks she herself had suggested Donna Clarice install. Dora from the house next door was watering the plants on her windowsill when she noticed the Amaral family leaving. The garage door opened and the Chevette pulled out slowly, with Pardal at the wheel and the Amarals in the back seat. Alvaro wore a gray suit, and Clarice had her hair up in an elegant bun. They waved at Rita, who returned the greeting by slightly raising her free hand. "See you tomorrow, Rita," Clarice shouted from the car window. "See you tomorrow, Donna Clarice. Have a good dinner?" The car disappeared down the street, leaving the house submerged in the typical silence of a Saturday night in San Francisco. Rita continued her work, focused on leaving every corner spotless. There was a private satisfaction in seeing the final result of a day's dedication. Gleaming floors, transparent windows, every object in its proper place. Later that evening, as Dora was closing her windows, she heard raised voices coming from the neighboring yard. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clearly one of argument. A female voice, which she recognized as Rita's, seemed to be trying to explain herself, while a male voice interrupted her with short, harsh phrases. What caught Dora's attention most was the sound that followed. A rhythmic thud of metal against packed earth. Thump, thump, thump. It was the unmistakable sound of someone digging, a shovel cutting through the damp soil of the yard. She thought perhaps a gardener was getting a head start on Sunday's work. Or maybe Rita herself was tending to a flower bed at her employer's request. "That woman never stops," Dora murmured, turning away from the window. Rita had just filled her bucket at the back faucet when she realized she wasn't alone. Someone had come through the back door, which led directly to the yard via a side passage. Her muscles tensed instinctively. It was unusual for there to be any movement on the property at this hour, with the family out and the house empty. "Who's there?" she called out, her grip tightening on the bucket's handle. The answer came in the form of footsteps on the grass approaching the area where she was working. Rita felt her heart quicken. In 3 years of cleaning that house, she had never felt unsafe, but something in that moment was wrong. The evening air felt heavier, charged with a tension she couldn't explain. The orange flannel slipped from her hand and fell onto the grass. As she bent to pick it up, she heard the voice behind her. "You shouldn't be here." The words were low, almost a whisper, but carried an authority that made Rita straighten up slowly. She turned, still holding the bucket, and recognized the speaker. It was someone with access to the house, someone who knew the family's routine, who knew exactly where she would be at that hour. Donna Clarice said I could stay until I finished." Rita tried to explain, but her voice came out weaker than she intended. "You weren't supposed to see." "See what? I didn't see anything, I was just—" But the words died in her throat as she realized the person in front of her wasn't interested in explanations. The fixed stare, the clenched fists, the tense posture, it all indicated that something had gone terribly wrong. Rita took a step back, still clutching the bucket as if it could protect her. The orange flannel lay on the grass, a bright spot against the dark green that was being swallowed by the approaching night. "Please," she whispered, "I won't tell anyone. I just want to go home." But it was already too late. What happened in the next few minutes would remain buried with Rita for 14 long years, until a yellow excavator brought back not only her bones, but also all the questions the Amaral family never wanted to answer. The sound of the shovel cutting through the earth echoed in the yard until almost 8 o'clock. Dora heard the intermittent thuds as she prepared dinner, thinking it was strange for someone to be gardening on a Saturday night. The sound was coming from the area near the wall that divided the two properties, a patch of land where Donna Clarice had tried to plant some hydrangeas the year before. Around 8:50, as Dora went to lock her windows before bed, she noticed that the light in the Amaral's laundry room was still on. A frantic shuffling in the yard next door caught her eye. Someone was pacing back and forth, carrying something heavy. It was difficult to make out details in the twilight, but she could see a stooped silhouette dragging what looked like a dark plastic sack. It must be construction debris, Dora thought. The family was always making small repairs to the house, and it wasn't unusual for them to pile up rubble in the yard before the special collection. What she didn't know was that, at that very moment, Rita de Lourdes was being buried less than 10 meters from her window. On Sunday morning, Donna Ivone woke, expecting to hear the familiar sound of a key turning in the lock. Rita always arrived early on Sundays, bringing sweet bread from the bakery and news from the previous day's work. But the sun climbed higher in the sky and the house remained silent. By 10 o'clock, Yvonne began to worry. She called the Amaral house, but no one answered. She tried twice more throughout the morning with no success. Luciana, who had returned in the early hours from a party with friends, found her mother pacing the small living room, twisting a handkerchief between her fingers. "Mom, you look so anxious. What's wrong?" "Your sister isn't here yet, and she never runs late without calling." Luciana tried to reassure her. She probably slept at her employer's house, sometimes when the work is heavy. But Yvonne shook her head. "Rita always comes home to sleep. Always. In 3 years working there, she has never once stayed the night." At the Amaral house, Sunday unfolded as usual. Clarice's sister arrived around 2 in the afternoon, complimented the impeccable cleaning, and asked no questions about the housekeeper's absence. Alvaro commented only that Rita had done an excellent job and had likely left earlier than expected. Pardal washed the Chevette in the garage and noticed the yard was a bit of a mess. There was earth scattered near the back wall and a few bricks were stacked unevenly. He thought about mentioning it to Alvaro, but decided it wasn't his business. Everyone had their own responsibilities. On Monday, when Rita failed to show up for her regular job at another house, Donna Ivone hesitated no longer. She took 2 buses to downtown Niterói and went straight to the 76th Police Precinct. The gray, poorly maintained building stood on a busy street, always crowded with people bearing all manner of troubles. The detective on duty, a middle-aged man with a look of perpetual exhaustion, listened to Yvonne's story with little attention. Missing persons cases were routine, especially involving domestic workers. Most of the time, they reappeared after a few days with stories of family problems or complicated relationships. "Rita is not the type to run off," Yvonne insisted, "and she always calls if she's going to be late, always." She mentioned Edmilson, the construction worker Rita sometimes dated. The two had an unstable relationship marked by fights and reconciliations. Rita was just another domestic worker who had vanished in a big city. The first official visit to the Amaral house took place on a rainy Thursday. 2 military police officers knocked on the door and were greeted by Clarice, who was cooperative but visibly nervous. She confirmed that Rita had worked on Saturday and that the family had gone out to dinner around 7 in the evening. "When we got back, around 11, she was already gone," Clarice explained. "She left everything tidy as always." The officers conducted a cursory inspection of the house. They went through the kitchen, laundry room, bedrooms, and finally reached the yard. There they noticed the disturbed earth near the back wall and the irregularly stacked bricks, as if someone had done some minor construction. "Have you done any work in the garden recently?" one of the officers asked. Alvaro, who had arrived home from work during the visit, answered without hesitation. "We're planning to put in a new flower bed. I turned over the soil myself over the weekend to check its quality." The explanation seemed plausible enough. The officers jotted down the information, took a few photos of the house, and left. They didn't dig in the flower bed, they didn't measure the disturbed area, and they didn't collect any soil samples. The final report mentioned only signs of recent gardening, consistent with normal domestic activities. The posters began to appear at bus stops a week after the report was filed. Donna Ivone had used part of her savings to print 50 copies on plain white paper, featuring a smiling photo of Rita and the words, "Missing, Rita de Lourdes de Silva, 50 years old, housekeeper, last seen on March 21, 1987, in Niterói. Any information, please call." Luciana helped her mother paste the posters at bus stops between São Gonçalo and Niterói, especially along the route Rita used to get to work. Some people stopped to read, shaking their heads in pity before moving on. Others didn't even glance. The first and only phone call came 3 days later. A gas delivery man claimed he had seen a woman in an apron standing at the gate of the Amaral house around 8:15 on that Saturday night. But when the police went to investigate, the man couldn't provide precise details. It could have been her, or maybe not. It was dark and I was in a hurry. The lead went nowhere. Edmilson was interrogated on a Tuesday morning. He arrived at the station visibly nervous, sweating despite the cool autumn air. He confirmed he had been dating Rita for the past 2 years, but denied any involvement in her disappearance. "We fought on the Monday before she vanished," he admitted, fidgeting with his hands on the table. "But it was nothing. Just me being jealous, you know how it is." "Jealous of what?" "I thought she had her eye on another guy, but then I saw I was wrong." Edmilson had to prove where he was on Saturday night. He said he had been drinking with friends at a bar in São Gonçalo until late. 3 men confirmed his story, and the bar owner remembered him because Edmilson had gotten into a fight with another customer and was nearly thrown out. "He was here until about 2 in the morning, the owner confirmed. "Drunk as a skunk." The investigation stalled for lack of concrete evidence. There were no signs of violence at the Amaral house. There were no reliable witnesses to what had happened after 7 o'clock on Saturday night. Rita had simply vanished without a trace. The lead detective made 2 more visits to the Amaral family home. On the first, he spoke with each resident separately. Alvaro maintained his story that they had gone out for dinner and returned to an empty house. Clarice repeated that Rita was an exemplary employee who had never caused any trouble. Pardal said he hadn't noticed anything unusual. On the second visit, the detective brought a technician to examine the yard more closely. They measured the area where the earth had been disturbed and took photographs from various angles. The technician collected a few soil samples, but the analysis revealed nothing more than common earth mixed with leaf debris and small roots. "If they buried something here, they did a very good job," the technician commented. "But it could also just be gardening." The family stuck to their story about planting a new flower bed. Alvaro even showed them a plant catalog he claimed to have bought at a garden center in downtown Niterói. Pages were marked with a pen, indicating species he intended to cultivate. Dora, the neighbor, was interviewed twice. She confirmed hearing raised voices late on Saturday afternoon, followed by the sound of someone digging. But when asked if she had seen who was in the yard, she admitted she couldn't identify anyone. "It was hard to see in the dim light," she explained. "I just heard the noises. I thought it was normal work." "Did you recognize Rita's voice in the argument?" Dora hesitated before answering. "It sounded like her voice, yes, but I can't be absolutely certain." 6 months after the disappearance, the case began to lose priority. New crimes occurred every day in Niterói, and the precinct lacked the resources to maintain an active investigation indefinitely. Rita de Lourdes had become another name in a yellowed folder stored in a filing cabinet that smelled of mold and nasty cigarettes. Donna Ivone continued to call the station once a week, always asking if there was any news. The answer was invariably the same. "We're still looking into it, ma'am. If anything new comes up, we'll be in touch." But they never were. In 1991, 4 years after the disappearance, the case was formally closed due to a lack of evidence. Rita de Lourdes da Silva had officially become a missing person, an unsolved case in a city where mysteries piled up like dust in police archives. The orange flannel cloth remained in the drawer of Donna Ivone's bedroom, waiting for the day its owner would return for it. But the years passed and Rita remained silent, buried just a few meters from the place where she had worked for the last years of her life. The 1990s brought changes to the Amaral house. Alvaro lost his job at the electrical supply company during the country's economic crisis, and Clarice had to work full-time to keep the bills paid. Money grew tight, and small luxuries like gardening and regular property maintenance were abandoned. Pardal was let go in 1993. The blue Chevette was sold to cover debts, and the family began using public transport. The garage became a storage space for objects that no longer had a place inside: old furniture, broken appliances, dusty boxes of old documents. The grass in the yard grew wild, unchecked by regular mowing. The hydrangeas Clarice had tried to plant near the wall died from neglect, leaving only a few dry branches and compacted earth. The flower bed where Rita was buried blended completely into the rest of the untamed garden. In 1995, the couple decided to move to a smaller apartment in downtown Niterói. The house was put up for sale, but interested buyers were few and the offers were low. The property sat vacant for months, the for sale signs fading in the sun and rain. Dora watched the progressive decay of the neighboring property with a mixture of sadness and relief. The house where Rita had disappeared was transforming into a silent ruin, overgrown with weeds and inhabited only by stray cats seeking shelter in the open garage. "There's something wrong with that house," she would comment to other neighbors. "Ever since that cleaning lady vanished, that family never had another moment of peace." Donna Ivone aged 10 years in 5. Her hair turned completely white, and she developed arthritis in her hands that prevented her from sewing for long periods. Luciana married in 1994 and moved to Duke de Caxias, but she continued to visit her mother every Sunday. The orange flannel remained in the same drawer, now accompanied by other items of Rita's that Yvonne couldn't bring herself to discard. A brown plastic comb, a nearly finished tube of lipstick, 2 coins found in the pocket of a dress. They were fragments of a life cut short without explanation or farewell. Luciana tried to convince her mother to get rid of Rita's things. "Mom, it's been almost 10 years. You have to accept that she's not coming back." But Yvonne refused. "Until a body turns up, my daughter is alive somewhere, and when she comes back, she'll want her things." In 1998, the Amaral house was finally sold to a real estate developer. José Carlos Mendonça had bought the property with the intention of demolishing it to build a small residential building. But problems with the paperwork delayed the project for years. The property remained abandoned. The ceramic roof tiles began to come loose in the summer rains, and the cream-colored paint peeled away completely, leaving dark stains on the walls. Broken windows were replaced with plywood boards, giving the house a ghostly appearance. The neighbors grew accustomed to the ruin. Children invented stories about ghosts and hidden treasures. But the adults preferred to ignore the dilapidated property. It was easier to pretend it didn't exist than to remember the mystery that had begun there. Luciana developed a strange habit of taking the bus past the Amaral street whenever she went to visit her mother. She would get off 2 stops early and walk along the opposite sidewalk, observing the crumbling house through the rusted fence. She could never quite explain why she did it. Perhaps she was hoping to see some sign, some change that might explain what had happened to Rita. "Did you see anything different at the house?" Donna Ivone would ask every time her daughter returned from these walks. "No, Mom. It's the same. Tall weeds, boarded-up windows, locked gate. In 1999, an anonymous tip briefly rekindled police interest in the case. Someone called the precinct claiming to have information about the disappearance of Rita de Lourdes. The detective who took the call, a young man who had recently taken the post, decided to investigate. The tip yielded nothing concrete. The person on the other end of the line spoke in a disguised voice and made vague accusations about people who know more than they're telling. When pressed for details, the caller hung up. Attempts to trace the call were unsuccessful. Even so, 2 officers were sent to conduct another inspection of the abandoned house. They found the gate broken open, likely by teenagers looking for an adventure, and the yard completely consumed by weeds. The grass had grown so high it was impossible to identify where the old flower bed mentioned in the 1987 reports had been. "Sir, the weeds here are 2 meters high," one of the officers reported over the radio. "If someone's buried here, you'd need an excavator to find them." The detective decided there was no justification for an expensive and time-consuming excavation based on a baseless, anonymous tip. The case went back into the archives, where it would remain until 2001. All that time, Rita de Lourdes remained in her forced silence a few meters below the surface. Her clothes had long since surrendered to the damp earth, but her bones remained intact, protected by the plastic bag that had become her unwitting shroud. The aluminum bucket slowly rusted, and the orange flannel cloth that had fallen on the grass that March night grew dark with soil and time. With every heavy rain, water seeped deeper into the ground, carrying minerals and nutrients that fed the thick grass growing over the makeshift grave. Nature ran its course, oblivious to the human drama buried within its roots. The new millennium brought with it a renewed sense of hope for José Carlos Mendonça, the businessman who had bought the Zamaral house. After years of bureaucratic struggles, he had finally managed to regularize all the necessary paperwork to demolish the property and erect a small residential building with 4 apartments. The architectural plans had been ready since 1999. They detailed a simple 3-story building with 2-bedroom apartments aimed at middle-class families. The location was good, on a quiet street in San Francisco, and Mendonça was certain he could sell all the units quickly. In January of 2001, he hired J.M. Engenaria to carry out the construction. The company was small but had a solid reputation in the region, specializing in small-scale residential buildings. The site foreman, Antonio, was a man of experience, having worked on dozens of similar projects over his 30-year career. The first stage was to demolish the old house and prepare the land for the foundations. But when the crew arrived on site that February, they found the property in a state even worse than they had imagined. The undergrowth was so thick it was impossible to walk through the yard without a machete. Small trees had sprouted near the wall, their roots beginning to threaten the structure of the abandoned house. "We'll have to clear all this before we can start anything," Antonio told Mendonça. "Otherwise, we can't even get the machines in." The cleanup took 2 weeks. A team of 4 men cut back the weeds, removed the smaller trees, and cleared the debris that had accumulated in the yard over the years. They found everything. Old tires, pieces of furniture, broken bottles, even a rusted stove someone had thrown over the wall. By March, the demolition of the house was complete. The mini excavator hired for the job did the work in 3 days, reducing the 2-story structure to a sordid pile of rubble. Bricks on one side, wood on another, roof tiles stacked for reuse. With the land cleared, Antonio could finally assess the soil conditions for the foundation. The project called for a drainage trench that would cut across the yard from one end to the other, connecting to the street's sewage system. It was a necessary step to prevent future moisture problems in the new building. On the morning of May 23, 2001, the Caterpillar 315C mini excavator arrived on site to dig the trench. It was a compact yellow machine, ideal for working in tight spaces. The operator, a man known as Beto, had 20 years of experience at the controls of heavy equipment. "Where do you want me to start?" Beto asked Antonio. "Right here, from the wall to the front, a straight line about 50 meters long, 80 centimeters wide, and 1.5 meters deep." Beto positioned the excavator and started the engine. The diesel roar echoed down the quiet San Francisco street, drawing the attention of curious neighbors. Dora, now in her 70s, opened her window to watch the activity. It was the first time in 4 years she had seen any movement on that property. For the first few meters, the excavator's bucket sliced through the soil with ease. Light brown earth mixed with roots and the remains of decomposed leaves. Nothing out of the ordinary for a yard that had been abandoned for so long. At 10:40 in the morning, Beto was digging near the midpoint of the planned route when he felt a different kind of resistance. The bucket struck something solid, something that felt neither like rock nor a thick root. "Must be a pipe," he thought, backing the machine up to get a better look. When the bucket rose on the second attempt, it brought with it something that made Beto shut off the excavator's engine immediately. It was a piece of torn black plastic caked in the more compact red earth from the bottom of the trench. Antonio walked over to see what had happened. "What is it, Beto?" "There's something strange down here." The two men climbed into the trench and began to examine what the bucket had exposed. Carefully, they cleared away more dirt with their hands, and it soon became clear that the black plastic was not just ordinary trash. It was wrapped around something that had the shape and consistency of— "My God," Antonio whispered. At the bottom of the trench, partially exposed by the digging, lay a human skeleton in a supine position. The bones were stained dark by the earth but were perfectly preserved. Alongside the remains, scattered within the torn plastic bag, were fragments of dark blue fabric and what looked like time-degraded adhesive tape. Work stopped instantly. Antonio told Beto to get out of the trench and ordered all the workers to stay away from the area. With trembling hands, he took out his cell phone and dialed 190. On the other end of the line, the operator heard a confused report about human bones and a skeleton in a backyard. "Sir, are you certain they are human remains?" the operator asked. "Ma'am, I've been in construction for 30 years. I know the difference between a person's bones and an animal's." The first patrol car arrived within 15 minutes. 2 military police officers got out and walked to the trench, where they confirmed the discovery. One of them secured the area with yellow tape, while the other radioed for the forensics team. "Central, this is 154. I confirm the location of human remains. Requesting an ICCE technician and a delegate to the scene." Dora watched it all from her window. At 74, her memory wasn't what it used to be, but something about the scene stirred an unsettling recollection. She had seen that excavator stop in the exact same spot where 14 years earlier, she had heard the sound of someone digging in the night. The forensic experts arrived around noon. 2 technicians from the Carlos Eboli Institute of Criminology began the meticulous work of documenting the scene before removing any evidence. Panoramic photographs, precise measurements mapping the position of every object found. The plastic bag had torn in several places, allowing soil to mix with the remains. But the deterioration had not been complete. It was still possible to identify pieces of fabric, strands of hair, and even some fibers of what looked like an orange flannel cloth. "Doctor, take a look at this," one of the experts said to the delegate who had arrived to oversee the work. Next to the skeleton, at the same stratigraphic level, were 2 objects that had better withstood the test of time: a completely rusted and dented aluminum bucket and an orange flannel cloth darkened by the soil but still recognizable. Delegate Carlos Enrique Santos was a young man only 3 years out of the academy, but he took his job seriously. He quickly leafed through the file of cold cases he had brought from the station and found the yellowed folder with the name Rita de Lourdes da Silva. Disappearance, 1987. "Is there anything in here about the victim's personal belongings?" he asked the experts. One of the technicians read from the original report. "According to the family, she always worked with her own aluminum bucket and an orange flannel cloth she kept in her apron pocket." Santos looked from the objects found in the trench to the description on the paper. The coincidence was too great to be ignored. The removal of the remains took the rest of the afternoon. Each bone was catalogued and photographed in situ before being carefully lifted from the earth. The skull was intact, as was most of the skeletal structure. There were no obvious signs of trauma from a projectile or blade, but some ribs showed microfractures that could indicate compression. The plastic bag was carefully opened on site. Inside, besides the fragments of navy blue fabric and what appeared to be part of a white apron, the experts found a simple keychain with 2 small keys and pieces of the adhesive tape that had been used to seal the bag. "Whoever did this didn't want the body to be found," one of the technicians observed. "Wrapped it up properly, used tape to seal it, dug deep. If it weren't for this construction, we probably never would have found her." News of the discovery spread quickly through the neighborhood. Neighbors gathered outside the property, speculating about the identity of the remains and the circumstances of the death. Some vaguely remembered the disappearance of a cleaning lady years ago, but the details had been lost to time. Dora was one of the first to be questioned. Despite her advanced age, she was able to provide valuable information about the events of March 1987. She confirmed hearing an argument followed by the sound of digging, exactly in the area where the remains were found. "I knew something was wrong," she told the delegate. "For 14 years I've been thinking about that sound of a shovel." At the end of the day, when the experts had finished their work and the remains were removed to the medical examiner's office, all that was left was the open trench and a small pile of earth beside it. The yellow excavator stood motionless, its dirt-caked bucket a silent witness to the discovery that had ended a mystery of more than a decade. José Carlos Mendonça, the property owner, authorized the police to carry out any necessary excavations. He knew his project would be on hold for weeks, perhaps months, but he understood the gravity of the situation. "Do whatever you need to do," he told the delegate. "If there's anything else buried here, it's better to find out now." But additional searches in the following days revealed no other graves. Rita de Lourdes had been buried alone in that corner of the yard, waiting in silence for 14 years until urban progress brought her back to the light. The official identification began at the medical examiner's office 3 days after the discovery. The bones were carefully cleaned and arranged on a metal table, forming a nearly complete skeleton. Only a few minor phalanges had been lost during the years of decomposition. The forensic anthropologist, Dr. Marina Cardoso, was assigned to conduct the examination. With 15 years of experience analyzing human remains, she was able to quickly determine the victim's basic characteristics. Female, between 40 and 55 years of age at the time of death. Approximate height of 1.60 m, she noted in her report. The bones show signs consistent with heavy physical labor. Minor osteophytes on the lumbar vertebrae, degenerative changes in the knees and wrists. Typical for a person engaged in work requiring repetitive effort. The description was a perfect match for the profile of Rita de Lourdes. The dental examination was crucial for a definitive identification. Donna Ivone, now 82 and quite frail, managed to locate among her old papers a card from the health clinic in São Gonçalo. where Rita had received dental treatment a few years before her disappearance. The record showed the extraction of a lower molar and an amalgam filling in the upper right first premolar. When the forensic odontologist examined the skull found in the trench, the features were identical. A complete match, the specialist confirmed. The dentition corresponds exactly to the clinical records of Rita de Lourdes da Silva. But it was the DNA analysis that provided the final, irrefutable proof. Luciana, now 31 and a mother of two, provided blood samples for genetic comparison. The lab extracted mitochondrial DNA from the bones and confirmed a match with the maternal line. Probability of kinship, 99.7%. The technical report stated. The mortal remains belong unequivocally to Rita de Lourdes da Silva. Parallel to the identification, experts tried to determine the cause of death. There were no signs of bullet holes or cut marks that would indicate the use of a sharp weapon. The microfractures observed on some of the ribs suggested thoracic compression, possibly caused by asphyxiation or crushing. The victim may have died from mechanical asphyxia. The medical examiner concluded strangulation, suffocation, or chest compression. Without preserved soft tissues, it's impossible to be more specific. What was clear was that Rita had not died of natural causes. Someone had killed her and then gone to elaborate lengths to conceal the body. The investigation then turned back to the suspects from 1987. Alvaro and Clarice Amaral were located in a town in the interior of Rio de Janeiro, where they had moved after selling the house. Both in their 70s, they seemed surprised by the discovery but stuck to their original stories. "We went out to dinner and when we came back she was already gone," Clarice repeated. "We never imagined she was buried in our own backyard." Alvaro was more direct. "If I had killed the woman, you think I would bury her at my own house? What kind of logic is that?" Mauricio Pardal was harder to find. He had changed jobs several times and moved to other states. When he was finally located working in a mechanic's shop in Minas Gerais, he also denied any involvement. "I took the car out that Saturday, but it was just to buy cigarettes. I came back and didn't see Rita again. I figured she'd just left early." Edmilson had died in 1995, the victim of a workplace accident at a construction site in Duque de Caxias. He took whatever secrets he might have had to the grave, leaving behind only the memories of a turbulent and jealous relationship. Detective Santos retraced the entire path of the original investigation, only to collide with the same obstacles from 1987. There was a scarcity of direct witnesses, a lack of conclusive physical evidence, and conflicting accounts of the events of that night. The only certainty was that Rita had been murdered and buried in the backyard where she worked, by someone who had access to the property and the foresight to choose a location that would remain hidden for years. Whoever did this knew the house, Santos concluded. They knew where to dig without drawing attention and had enough time to do a careful job. This was no crime of opportunity. It was planned and executed by someone who wanted to ensure the body would never be found. But after 14 years, memories had faded, evidence had deteriorated, and witnesses had aged or died. The case was now, technically, another solved homicide. They knew the victim and how she had died, but there was no prospect of identifying and punishing the culprit. Rita de Lourdes had finally been brought out of the silence, but the answers her family so desperately awaited would remain buried, along with the secrets of a March night in 1987. The news of the identification arrived at Donna Yvonne's home on a rainy June morning. Luciana took the call from Detective Santos and had to sit down in a kitchen chair to absorb the information. After 14 years of uncertainty, they finally knew where Rita was. "Mother," Luciana said, holding the old woman's trembling hands. They found Rita. Yvonne did not cry immediately. At 82 years old, she had mentally prepared herself for this moment for more than a decade. Her first words were, "Did she suffer?" "We don't know, Mother, but now she can have a proper burial." The orange flannel, which had remained tucked away in a drawer, was finally brought out from its hiding place. Yvonne held it to her chest, feeling the familiar texture of the fabric that had accompanied Rita on so many work days. It was a physical link to her vanished daughter, tangible proof that she had existed, had worked, had lived. The wake was a discreet affair, held in a simple chapel in São Gonçalo. Few people attended. Some old neighbors, former colleagues who still remembered Rita, and Edmilson Jr., the 20-year-old son of Rita's old boyfriend, who wished to pay his respects even after his own father's death. Inside the sealed urn lay the bones of Rita, finally at peace after 14 years in a clandestine grave. Beside the coffin, Luciana placed the orange flannel and the aluminum bucket that had been recovered from the excavation. They were the only objects that remained from her sister's life of labor. During the ceremony, the priest spoke of forgiveness and divine justice, but avoided mentioning the circumstances of her death. It was a funeral long overdue, a farewell that should have happened in 1987 but was only made possible by the chance discovery during a construction project. Donna Yvonne was too frail to endure the entire ceremony. At 82, with her health fragile and her heart weary from so much waiting, she passed away 3 weeks after Rita's burial. Luciana said her mother had finally found peace knowing her daughter was in sacred ground. The police investigation continued for a few more months but yielded no concrete results. The people involved in the original case were all elderly or had passed away. The physical evidence was limited to the mortal remains and the objects found in the grave, and no new witnesses or relevant information emerged. In December of 2001, the case was shelved once more, this time not for lack of a body or evidence of a crime, but for the impossibility of identifying the perpetrator. Rita de Lourdes da Silva had been officially recognized as a victim of homicide and concealment of a corpse, but her killer would remain unpunished. "It's frustrating," Detective Santos admitted in an interview with the local newspaper. "We are certain it was a homicide. We know the victim was buried where she worked, but after 14 years, the clues have been lost to time." Jose Carlos Mendonça resumed construction in January 2002, after forensics cleared the site. The trench where Rita was found was filled in, and the construction of the building proceeded as planned. Within 6 months, he had sold all 4 apartments to families untroubled by the land's grim history. Dora, the neighbor, continued to live in the house next door until 2005 when she moved to a nursing home. Before leaving, she gave one last interview to a journalist interested in the case. Her final words were, "I always knew something was wrong in that yard. For 14 years, I heard the sound of that shovel in my head." The building constructed on the site of the old Amaral house blended seamlessly into the neighborhood's landscape. 4 families live there today. Children play on the small playground built where the backyard once stood, and few of them know that Rita de Lourdes spent 14 years buried directly beneath their feet. The orange flannel was buried with Donna Yvonne at the old woman's express wish. The dented aluminum bucket stayed with Luciana, who keeps it in the attic of her home. Sometimes she takes it out of its chest and studies the rust that time has left on the metal, imagining how many houses Rita cleaned using that simple tool. There are no commemorative plaques, no monuments, no physical mark to indicate where Rita worked and died. Her story lives on only in the memory of those who knew her and in the dusty police files of the 70th Precinct, where the shelved inquiry takes up 3 centimeters on a shelf filled with similar cases. The Rita de Lourdes case became a reference in police academy courses in Rio de Janeiro. Criminal investigation instructors use the details of the original inquiry as an example of how crucial evidence can be overlooked in the first hours after a disappearance. Had the officers in 1987 simply dug into the freshly turned soil that was visible in the yard, this case would have been solved within 48 hours. Retired Detective Marcos Vieira would explain in his classes. Sometimes the solution is literally right in front of us, but we lack a scientific approach. The story also drew the attention of criminologists interested in crimes against domestic workers. An academic study published in 2003 analyzed 17 similar cases that occurred in the state of Rio de Janeiro between 1980 and 2000, identifying common patterns: low-income victims, superficial investigations, and the premature shelving of cases due to a lack of evidence. The Rita de Lourdes case exemplifies how socioeconomic issues influence the quality of police investigations, wrote researcher Dr. Fernanda Moraes. Had the victim been a missing executive from Ipanema, the outcome would surely have been different. For Luciana, now 41, the hardest part was not the absence of criminal justice, but the lack of answers about her sister's final moments. In the sporadic interviews she gave, she always asked the same questions. Did Rita suffer? Did she try to escape? Why did they do this to her? I accept that we will never know who killed my sister, she said in a television report in 2005, but I would like to understand why. Rita was a peaceful, hard-working person. She never got into trouble. Why would someone do such a thing? Unofficial theories varied. Some neighbors speculated about a sexual assault that turned violent when Rita resisted. Others suggested a dispute over money or valuables she might have seen in the house. There were those who believed it was a crime of passion involving Edmilson, despite his confirmed alibi. The most accepted version among investigators was that of a crime of opportunity that had escalated. Rita might have witnessed something she shouldn't have: a robbery, an affair, an illicit transaction, and was killed to ensure her silence. The careful burial in her own workplace suggested the perpetrator had the time and access to plan the concealment. Whoever killed Rita knew that house very well, Detective Santos concluded before his transfer. They knew where to dig, how to dig, and when to dig, and most importantly, they knew that patch of ground wouldn't be disturbed for a very long time. The psychological profile drawn up by experts pointed to an organized, meticulous killer, likely with no prior criminal record, someone who killed out of necessity, not pleasure, and who was lucky enough for the body to remain hidden for 14 years. If the construction hadn't happened in that exact spot, Rita would have remained missing forever, observed criminologist Dr. Eduardo Nascimento in his book, Forgotten Crimes of Rio de Janeiro. The murderer nearly achieved the perfect crime. The excavator missed the grave by only a few meters. Among the families who bought apartments in the building, some were unsettled. One even put their unit up for sale, but later changed their minds when they realized its value had dropped significantly. It was strange at first, knowing someone had been buried here, admitted Sandra Oliveira, a resident of apartment 201. But you get used to it. The building is well constructed, the neighborhood is quiet, and Rita was a good person. I think she would have preferred for happy families to live here. The small playground, built where the old yard used to be, became a meeting point for the building's children. Ironically, it is one of the most cheerful and lively spaces on the property, with children's laughter echoing directly over the spot where Rita spent her final moments. In 2010, Luciana returned to the neighborhood for the first time since her sister's funeral. She walked the streets Rita had traveled for 3 years, passed in front of the building that replaced the Amaral house, and observed the changes time had brought. It's strange, she told a friend who accompanied her, to think that Rita is at peace in the cemetery, but a part of her story is still here. Every time a child plays in that park, in a way, Rita is still present. The official investigation was never formally closed. Technically, it remains open as a homicide with an unidentified perpetrator, subject to reopening should new evidence arise. But after more than 2 decades, the chances of that happening are virtually zero. The case file fills a 300-page folder at the precinct, including testimonies, forensic reports, excavation photos, and investigation summaries. It is occasionally consulted by law and criminology students, but rarely by active investigators. Alvaro Amaral died in 2012 at the age of 79. His wife, Maritza, was still alive in 2015, living in a nursing home but with advanced dementia. That prevented her from giving coherent interviews. The handyman Pardal disappeared again and was never located by journalists. The orange flannel that Donna Yvonne had so carefully preserved has long since decomposed in the damp earth of the cemetery. The dented aluminum bucket remains in Luciana's attic, now more rusted but still recognizable as the tool Rita proudly carried every day. For the current residents of São Francisco, Rita de Lourdes has become a local urban legend. Mothers tell their daughters the story of the cleaning lady who disappeared and was found years later. A cautionary tale about the dangers that can hide behind the most normal of appearances. Rita's story teaches us that you never really know what goes on inside the houses where you work, said Maria Jose, a 52-year-old cleaner in the neighborhood. That's why I always tell my colleagues, if something seems strange, it's better to leave and lose the day's pay than to risk your life. The case became a touchstone for the importance of valuing domestic labor and protecting workers' rights. In 2013, when the National Congress approved a constitutional amendment expanding labor rights for the category, some politicians mentioned stories like Rita's to justify the legislation. How many Ritas are there across Brazil, invisible even in death? Questioned one representative during a speech. It is our responsibility to ensure these women have not only labor rights but also safety and dignity. Today, more than 20 years after the discovery of her remains, the story of Rita de Lourdes da Silva continues to echo in unexpected ways. In 2018, a municipal school in São Gonçalo named its library after her, a simple tribute to the woman who dedicated her life to her work and was cowardly murdered at the age of 50. The plaque at the entrance bears only the basic facts. Rita de Lourdes da Silva, 1937–1987. A hardworking woman, an example of dignity. It makes no mention of the tragic circumstances of her death, choosing instead to celebrate how she lived. Luciana, now a grandmother of 3, visits the library once a year on March 21st, the anniversary of Rita's disappearance. She tells the children in her family about the great-aunt they never knew, about the orange flannel that was her trademark of professional pride, about the aluminum bucket she insisted on using because it didn't absorb the smell of cleaning products. Rita was a woman ahead of her time, Luciana often says. She was proud of her work, always wanted the best for her family, and never bowed her head to anyone. Perhaps it was that very dignity that provoked the one who killed her. The building on the land where Rita was found is now home to its second generation of residents. The original owners have moved on, replaced by people who learn of the site's history from neighbors or internet searches. Some are bothered by it, others see it as a natural part of urban life. Every city has its ghosts, philosophizes João Carlos, the building's manager since 2019. What's important is that today this is a place of life, of families, of the future. She didn't choose to die here, but at least now the site serves to create good memories. In 2020, the playground where children now play was renovated. New toys were installed, along with a small flower garden tended by the residents themselves. By coincidence, or perhaps by some unspoken design, hydrangeas were planted near the very spot where Rita was buried. Every year between March and May, they burst into a riot of color, blooming over the earth that guards her secrets. Dora passed away in 2008, at the age of 85, in the nursing home where she lived. Until the very end of her life, she perfectly remembered the sound of the shovels slicing through the earth on that March night in 1987. "Some things you never forget," she would tell the nurses, "even when you want to." Over the years, the police precinct has seen its share of reforms and changes in command. The case file on Rita de Lourdes was digitized in 2016, part of a broad modernization of the judicial system. Now, the 300 pages of the investigation occupy just a few megabytes on a server accessible to researchers and students of unsolved crimes. Detective Santos, who led the investigation back in 2001, retired in 2015. He now lectures on criminal investigation in postgraduate courses. The case of Rita de Lourdes is always a feature in his presentations, a prime example of how time can both reveal and conceal the truth. "It took us 14 years to find where Rita was," he often tells his students, "but another 14 or even 40 years could pass, and we may never know who killed her. It's a lesson in humility for all of us who work in the pursuit of justice." The orange flannel cloth, a symbol of Rita's professional pride, was lost forever to the earth, but her memory persists in other forms, in the dented bucket that Luciana preserves like a relic, in the stories told by old neighbors, in the police reports that document the long search for justice in her name. Rita de Lourdes da Silva never received justice in the legal sense. Her killer may have died unpunished, taking his secrets to the grave. Or perhaps he lives on, somewhere, carrying the weight of a crime he believed was perfect. But Rita achieved something more important. She was never forgotten. Every time a cleaner demands better working conditions, every time a domestic worker reports harassment or violence, every time society recognizes the dignity of their labor, a part of Rita lives on. Her brutal death was not in vain if it awakened our consciousness to the vulnerability of thousands of women who, like her, dedicate their lives to caring for the homes and families of others. The silence of 14 years was shattered by a yellow excavator on a May morning. But the echo of Rita de Lourdes da Silva's story will continue to reverberate. As long as there are people willing to remember that behind every disappearance lies an interrupted life, a shattered family, and a search for truth that must never be abandoned. Sometimes justice does not come from the courts. Sometimes it arrives through memory, through dignity preserved, and through the certainty that a life had value, even when it was cowardly cut short on an ordinary March afternoon.